Directors General, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor today to present the fifth medium-term budget policy statement of President Zuma's administration, the fourth democratic government of the Republic of South Africa. Over the past 4.5 years, this government has steered our country through the worst global recession in 70 years. We have made bold and, I believe, correct decisions which have restored growth, supported our industries, and maintained a sustainable fiscal policy. This medium-term budget policy statement outlines government's intent to pursue a fiscal path that balances the requirements of countercyclicality with a commitment to medium-term consolidation. It keeps government's debt on a sustainable long-term path. It reflects our intent to implement the National Development Plan, to direct public spending to reignite inclusive growth and complement increased private sector investment. Support job creation and skills training, particularly for the unemployed youth amongst us. Create a climate for investment, manage the risks emerging from the current and potential global economic turbulence, cut costs and waste in government, and support black entrepreneurs as investors and partners in our industrialization and broadening of economic participation. Honorable Speaker, we must be frank with our fellow South Africans. This is a tough period, both globally and for the South African economy, but one with many possibilities and opportunities. We are developing and implementing solutions to the challenges facing our economy. The challenge of growth being too slow, unemployment being high, and many households being over-indebted. The challenge of government expenditure substantially exceeding our revenue. Since 2008, we've issued more than 1 trillion rands in debt. Our level of savings is too low to finance the investment we need. We import considerably more than we export. Unless we save and invest more, unless we expand and diversify our economy, unless we accelerate job creation, our aspirations will remain unfulfilled. Above all, we need faster, inclusive, job-creating growth. Without growth, we cannot increase the number of enterprises or create more jobs. Without growth, we cannot generate the revenue needed to fund our social programs, infrastructure investments, and incentives to support important industries. We have a duty to broaden opportunities for those who do not have secure incomes, formal jobs, solid homes, electricity, water, or access to health care. We have to share the benefits of growth so that those of our people who are most vulnerable and disadvantaged can say, this economy works for me. Faster and more inclusive growth calls for greater cooperation and better alignment between labor, business, government, and other actors to get things done, hearing each other out, finding solutions, encouraging innovation, and building a smart South Africa. Honorable Speaker, it is also appropriate 19 years into our hard-won democracy, to celebrate our achievements as a young nation. Our economy has grown by over 80% since 1993. National income per capita has increased by 40% in real terms. That's excluding inflation. Total employment has increased by more than 3.5 million jobs. Fixed investment increased from 15% of GDP in 1993 to an average of 20% over the past 5 years. A new tax administration has been established. An overhaul of the tax structure has allowed tax rates to be lowered while improving revenue performance. I would guess that in the last 10 years, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, we've refunded probably 100 billion rands to individual taxpayers in South Africa. Over 600 billion rands in BEE transactions have been recorded since 1995. More than 15 million people are now eligible for social grants. We have built more than 3 million homes and have substantially increased the number of households with access to electricity, water, and sanitation. However, our work is far from done. As President Mandela once said, and I quote, "After climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb," end of quote. We must continue our process of transformation against a backdrop of global economic uncertainty, and despite this uncertainty, we must be steadfast, creative, and bold. Honorable Speaker, the central message of the National Development Plan is clear: to accelerate progress, deepen democracy, build a more inclusive society, South Africa must translate political emancipation into economic well-being for all. It is up to South Africans to fix the future, starting today. This medium-term budget policy statement demonstrates government's resolve to implement the NDP through, among other things, the following: expanding electricity, transport, and communications capacity, promoting industrial competitiveness and job creation, addressing challenges in mining and community development, supporting growth of our cities and special economic zones, broadening rural development and expanding agricultural opportunities, and strengthening the public service delivery while combating waste and corruption. As the President noted in his budget speech, and I quote, "We have moved to the implementation of the plan. Going forward, all delivery agreements, sector plans, departmental strategic plans, as well as provincial and municipal plans, will be aligned to the National Development Plan," end of quote. So we have a plan, and we now have to track progress year by year in its implementation. Let me highlight some of the projects that we are already having in progress. The construction of the Medupi and Kusile power stations is well underway. Rail capacity has been expanded to support manganese and coal exports. Over the next 12 years, we will replace more than 300 trains for the 2 million people who use metro rail services every day. Tax incentives for industrial development projects, at least now I know you're awake. Tax incentives for industrial development projects amounting to 10 billion rands have been approved over the past 3 years, which will support investment amounting to 35 billion rands. The Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program has approved 387 applications since mid-2012, with a value of 2.6 billion rands. In support of regional infrastructure development, the Development Bank of Southern Africa has provided almost 1.5 billion rands for road projects in Angola this year, and committed funding of 3 billion rands to energy projects in Tanzania and the Democratic Republic of Congo, amongst many other projects. The expanded Public Works program created 970,000 work opportunities last year. The Jobs Fund has approved allocations of 3.4 billion to more than 60 projects, which will generate 90,000 permanent jobs and about 100,000 training opportunities over the period ahead. The President recently launched the Bridge City project, which brings together public and private investment to create a new urban center linking the communities of Inanda, Phoenix, and Tuzuma and Kwamashu north of Durban. Another excellent example of partnership between public and private sectors is the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program. A total of 47 projects have been approved to be completed between 2014 and 2016. The first 75 megawatt solar plant in the Northern Cape was connected to the Eskom transmission grid last month, 3 months ahead of schedule. 2 wind farms in the Eastern Cape will be connected by May next year. Honourable Speaker, these are just some of the ways in which the implementation of the National Development Plan is proceeding. In many cases, it builds on initiatives that were already underway. In other areas, new programs or reform proposals are being introduced. To support job creation in special economic zones and for young work seekers, a revised employment tax incentive bill will be formally introduced in Parliament tomorrow. This forms part of the multi-pronged approach to expanding work opportunities, especially for young people, envisaged in the National Youth Accord. The evidence on this is very clear. If young people find work within a reasonable time frame after leaving school, this greatly improves their lifetime career prospects. These are steps towards faster, more inclusive growth, and these are all, sorry, my prompter isn't working all that well. And these are all areas in which private sector and civil society involvement is no less important than the role played by government. Honourable Speaker, let's look at the economic outlook. In crafting our fiscal strategy for the next 3 years, Cabinet has taken careful account of global and local economic circumstances. Global economic activity remains subdued. In the euro area, which is our main trading partner, GDP growth of 1% is expected next year, after negative growth during much of 2012 and 2013. The IMF has revised down the 2013 growth outlook for developing countries from 5% to 4.5%. Our economic prospects are interconnected with those with these global trends. As the United States tapers its quantitative easing program and starts to raise interest rates, this will impact on our debt costs and might cause further volatility of the rand. For those of us that are not familiar with quantitative easing, this is a process whereby the Reserve Bank of the United States injects $85 billion a month into the financial system. Since about May this year, they've been announcing that they're going to taper. It means cut it down from 85 billion. And this is what has caused a lot of turbulence around the globe. And part of the consequences of this turbulence have reached our shores as well. And so we have emphasized in recent engagements with our international partners that progress towards a better future requires greater global cooperation and greater respect for the interdependence of industrialized and emerging economies. We now expect growth of about 2.1% in the South African economy this year, rising to 3.5% by 2016. Gross fixed capital formation will increase by about 4% this year, mainly driven by public sector infrastructure projects. Private sector investment growth remains subdued, but should gather momentum over the period ahead. Consumer price inflation is expected to average 5.9% in 2013 and to remain within the 3 to 6% target band next year. The Stats South Africa today announced 6% inflation increase over the past period. A trade deficit of 2.6% of GDP was recorded in the first half of 2013, contributing to a deterioration in the current account of the balance of payments to about 6.5% of GDP. Muted economic growth has translated into limited gains in job creation. The quarterly labor force survey indicates an increase in employment of about 275,000 in the year to July, but formal non-agricultural employment growth has been slow. So the challenge that faces us is how do we boost confidence and build stability in this kind of environment? Over the past year, government has been working with business and labor in several sectors to build a better investment climate in South Africa. A recent JSE and UBS roadshow in New York brought government ministers, representatives of the Reserve Bank, and leading South African CEOs together on the same platform, presenting a balanced perspective on the South African economy. Deputy President Motlanthe and Minister Shabangu responded quickly to alleged concerns of investors in the mining industry. Ministers Shabangu and Oliphant have also made progress in resolving labor disputes in this sector. Minister Davies has engaged with senior executives and labor representatives to improve cooperation and restore confidence in the automotive sector. Constructive cooperation between government, business, and organized labor also characterizes the work of the task team on infrastructure, which aims to get these crucial projects moving. Meanwhile, a wide range of measures are in place to give greater impetus to investment. Some of these are the following. Ministers Gigaba and Peters are overseeing substantial improvements in road and rail logistics including reductions in container handling charges at our ports. The Special Economic Zones framework introduced by Minister Davies provides new opportunities for supporting industrial development and exports. Under Minister Patel's leadership, action has been taken to ensure that competition is not undermined by collusive practices. Improved administration of work permits for skilled foreign workers will be implemented next year by Minister Pandor. Reforms are also underway to enhance private sector participation in the electricity sector and improve the structure of support programs to firms. Work in progress on a new promotion and protection of investment bill and a policy framework to address investor concerns relating to ownership, tax, industrial support measures, and exchange controls is also being done. Government remains committed to macroeconomic stability, supported by prudent fiscal management and sound monetary policy. We are aware of the risks posed by the deficit on our current account, which has so far been mitigated by our flexible exchange rate, but which over the long term requires fundamental change to the structure of our economy. These policies ensure that the country's finances are sustainable, that wages, social benefits, and savings are not eroded by high inflation, and that the economy can absorb external shocks. Financial sector reforms are now in the implementation phase, with the Twin Peaks legislation to establish 2 new regulatory authorities to be submitted to the Cabinet shortly. The retirement reform program is also progressing with the consultation process on retirement fund costs at its final stage. Draft regulations will be released shortly. Allow me now, Honourable Speaker, to move to the fiscal policy framework which is set out in this statement. We remain committed to counter-cyclical fiscal management and long-term sustainability. A sustainable expansion of public services is an important developmental goal and cannot be achieved without economic growth. A larger economy means higher revenue. The 2013 MTBPS balances fiscal consolidation with support to the economy. The proposed fiscal framework will meet the 2013-14 deficit target as defined in the new format presented in the 2013 budget review. I must just pause for a moment, colleagues and honourable members, and point out that there is a change in the way in which the deficit is being calculated. So the old number would have been 4.6, the new number is 4.2, but it's accounting, if you like, technicalities that are giving us slightly different numbers, but they mean the same thing. And we've explained this to the media earlier on. We want to narrow the deficit going forward in order to stabilize public debt. Despite all of this, we are growing expenditure at 2.2% in real terms, above inflation, but within a clear expenditure ceiling. We are containing spending growth on wages and goods and services in order to stabilize debt and begin rebuilding fiscal space. Expected gross tax revenue for 2013-14 has been revised down marginally by 3 billion rands to 895 billion. Personal income tax collection remains strong as a result of high wage settlements, and corporate income tax has been robust. Lower revenue growth is expected over the medium term as a result of slower economic growth than we projected in February. The Tax Review Committee, chaired by Judge Davis, established earlier this year, is mandated to inquire into the role of the tax system in promoting inclusive economic growth, employment creation, development, and fiscal sustainability. Its first report on small and medium-sized businesses will be submitted to us before the end of this year. The budget deficit will narrow from 4.2%, remember the old 4.6%, in the current year to 3% in 2016-17. This will stabilize debt over the medium term and begin to rebuild fiscal space. Government's approach is improving provision of public services is therefore focused on better use of existing resources and shifts in the composition of spending rather than raising overall expenditure. In respect of the division of revenue and the medium-term expenditure framework, as members of the House will know, Preparation of spending plans for the 2014 budget is now in progress and will be aligned to the NDP. The MTBPS provides a summary of the expenditure framework which Cabinet has approved and within which national and provincial budgets are being prepared. Our Constitution requires an equitable division of revenue between national, provincial, and local spheres of government. Over half of all revenue raised by national government through taxes and borrowing is transferred to provinces and municipalities. The MTBPS proposes a national appropriation of 1.1 trillion rands in 14-15, 1.2 trillion rands in 2015-16, and 1.3 trillion rands in 2016-17. Just under 10% of the total, or 110 billion rands next year, will be spent on debt service costs or interest costs. The budget framework includes a contingency reserve, which is 3 billion next year, 6 billion and 18 billion in the following 2 years. This allows for unforeseeable claims on the fiscus and future policy considerations. This leaves 1 trillion rands to be allocated next year, rising to 1.2 trillion in 2016-17. The proposed division of revenue allocates 484 billion rands to provinces, 93 billion rands to local government next year. The provincial share is largely determined by the requirements of education and health services and public service remuneration. Salary costs and infrastructure requirements are the main adjustments to the national votes. New planning requirements were announced in 2013 budget for provincial grant allocations for health and education infrastructure. All provinces have submitted the required asset management plans. Incentives to reward value for money in infrastructure delivery will take effect in the period ahead. In cooperation with the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, a program of expenditure reviews is in progress, focused on housing, broadband access, industrial development zones, in-service training of teachers, amongst other subjects. The NDP recognizes, honourable members, capable municipalities as the bedrock of a capable state. The National Treasury will continue to closely monitor and engage, and if need be, intervene in those municipalities that fail to live up to the standards of public service established in the Constitution. Minister Sanoli correctly emphasizes the need for more people who can afford to pay for municipal services to do so. We must also appeal to citizens not to damage public property during protests. In supporting municipalities over the MTEF period, a strong focus on economic development is proposed. From next year, the implementation of the City Support Program will be accelerated, including incentives to encourage more compact and efficient spatial planning and investment. The Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant receives an additional 934 million over the spending period to finance bulk water projects. By 2014, responsibility for the housing function will be devolved from provincial to local government in 6 metropolitan areas. As a result of these and other additions, allocations to provinces are increased by 11.2 billion rands during the 2014 MTF period, and allocations for local government are increased by just over 1 billion rands. Public expenditure growth has remained well within the limits set by government over the past 2 years. We have again put every effort into finding savings, eliminating waste, and reprioritizing spending towards key social and developmental objectives. Over the MTEF period, 10 billion rands in spending has been reprioritized. To achieve value for money in these initiatives, Honourable Speaker, we need improvements right across government in financial management. This applies equally to provinces and municipalities, where we have to see much better accountability and discipline in the stewardship of public resources. Wasteful expenditure on expensive cars and overseas trips is unacceptable. I will say more on this shortly. Rigorous procurement reforms are being initiated, especially in infrastructure project management, to strengthen service delivery, eliminate waste, and root out corruption. In reviewing the procurement system, we will also ensure that its contribution to broad-based black economic empowerment and local industrial development is reinforced. The NDP recognizes that we need, now that was a very meek applause, The NDP recognizes that we need a better education system to address poverty and build a more capable workforce. Education is the largest single category of government expenditure. It is projected to increase by an annual average rate of 7% over the next 3 years to 287 billion rands in 2016-17. The school infrastructure backlog grant and education infrastructure grant will grow strongly over this spending period. Employment and social security is the fastest growing function over the MTEF period, increasing by 14% to 75 billion rands in the outer year. The Community Works Programme will be operational in every municipality by the end of this 3-year period. Under the oversight of the Presidential Infrastructure Coordination Commission, the rate of public investment will gather further momentum next year and beyond, supporting social delivery, industrialization, and skills development. Projects that will get underway soon include a new dam in the Eastern Cape, rehabilitation of the main roadway between Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, and a new coal-fired power station. We are reviewing our financing and regulatory procedures to make them more flexible where needed, to provide for multi-year approvals, and to shorten decision times. These efforts will need to be accompanied by strengthened technical capacity at municipal level in particular. The PICC is focusing on maintenance of infrastructure with proposals to ring-fence budgeted allocations to ensure that we retain the usability and the value of infrastructure over the planned life cycle. The rollout of infrastructure has been accompanied by programs to support the local manufacture of components ranging from buses to energy components. These create sustainable, decent jobs and are part of the legacy that the infrastructure rollout plan will leave. In the past 12 months, we have also seen new projects announced by the private sector in the auto sector, television, film, and agro-processing, building on government's investment programs and supported by our development finance institutions. These initiatives signal our shared commitment to invest today for the expansion of the economy and more inclusive growth. Now, on the subject of adjustment appropriation, Honourable Speaker, allow me to comment briefly on the 2012-13 outcome and the revised numbers for 2013-14. Both nationally and in provinces, there has been a commendable moderation in spending growth. I would like to acknowledge the support of Cabinet colleagues and the provincial executives in adhering to budget limits. For the present year, the February budget provided for an appropriation of 1.06 trillion rands. After taking into account the proposed adjustments in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill and the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, expenditure this year will be 1.05 trillion or 9% more than the 2012-2013 outcome. The budget adjustments this year include, amongst others, 2.3 billion rands for national departments and provinces to cover inflation-related salary increases, 894 million rands rolled over from unspent balances in 2012-13, 500 million rands for expenditure financed by departmental revenue, earmarked amounts for broadband connectivity in schools, troop deployments in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and repair of flood-damaged infrastructure. Details of further adjustments are set out in the adjusted estimates of national expenditure. As government, we acknowledge that we too must provide value for money. Although most government spending is effectively managed, there are many opportunities to cut or minimize costs and to stop abuse. In these difficult times, Cabinet has decided to take a number of initiatives of its own volition, which will apply both to members of Cabinet and to officials in national, provincial, and local government departments, and would include state entities and state-owned enterprises. I want to quote the former president of Brazil, a good friend of President Zuma, President Lula, who says, and I quote, "Poor countries must give an example of honesty, of ethics, so that we truly deserve the solidarity from millions and millions of people who would like to contribute, but sometimes are not sure their money will go where it should go," end of quote. In respect of the executive, including provincial and municipal executives, Cabinet, of its own accord, has decided the following. In respect of cars, the cost limits for official cars will be standardized. I don't want to advertise any particular brand. They haven't paid any fees for that. So there will there will be a particular standard that will be applied. For example, a BMW 5 Series or an Audi 6 or whatever the case might be. But that will be the ceiling within which all cars that will be bought for executives at a national and provincial level and in municipal entities will work within. So, Mr. Speaker, if I can get your protection, it's unusual to have all this heckling during an MTBPS. But I understand elections are coming closer, anxiety is getting greater, and then simple etiquette is often
Order,
forgotten.
members, order.
So let me repeat. The Cabinet has decided of its own accord that there will be these following standards that will be put into place for cars. So cost limits will be set. Bulk purchasing will be used to reduce costs, security features will be considered, and there will be no compensation for the use of personal cars. As far as overseas delegations are concerned, business class only for ministers, assistants to ministers will be limited to 2, direct routes will be used, the number of officials to be kept to a minimum by each of the delegations that are going. In respect of housing, ministers awaiting allocation of houses will be accommodated in rented apartments and not hotels any longer. New refurbishment guidelines. New refurbishment guidelines for limiting costs will be developed. As of now, and as soon as we can get the message out from the presidency, no credit cards will be issued or exist once these notices are received by all executive members around the country. They're to be scrapped. Our approach to reducing costs and eliminating wasteful expenditure in the rest of government will focus on 6 areas over the period ahead, honourable members. The largest is consultancy services. There are, of course, necessary engineering and advisory services employed by government departments. However, we need A, better contract management, B, stricter control of consultancy fees, C, each government entity is to develop a consultancy reduction plan over the course of this financial year. The second aspect is amongst officials as well, no credit cards to be issued and the existing ones to be cancelled. On travel and related costs, the hiring of cars is to be restricted to B class, except for special instances such as rural travel. The number of officials travelling to Cape Town offices will be limited. And the leader of government business, Deputy President Motlanthe, has been asked to engage with Parliament on measures to reduce costs, such as the size of delegations appearing before parliamentary committees and the cost implications of the current Pretoria-Cape Town arrangement, the 2 capitals.
Order, members, order. Allow the minister to continue.
I didn't realize we were having a competition, Honorable Speaker. Business class for overseas travel is restricted to DGs and DDGs only, and locally business class for DGs only. As far as advertising is concerned, guidelines to limit non-essential costs and for better use of GCIS facilities will be developed. Catering and event costs or event management costs, guidelines will be developed for reducing events costs, including better use of government facilities rather than outside venues of meetings. I think this one will particularly interest the members on my left. No public funds to be used for the purchase of alcohol. Entertainment allowance for officials to be restricted to 2,000 rands. And following the review of accommodation leases as office accommodation initiated by Minister Gnesi, steps are underway to reduce long-term office accommodation and government housing costs and make further savings from electricity demand management measures in government buildings. So these are measures that Cabinet has decided upon and which will be implemented both amongst political office bearers and officials employed in government entities or state-owned entities. In conclusion, Honorable Speaker, I want to thank President Zuma for his wise and steadfast leadership and Deputy President Motlanthe for his valued guidance and intervention. I am grateful for the support of the Ministers' Committee on the Budget, members of the Treasury Committee, my Cabinet colleagues and Deputy Ministers, Premiers and Provincial Finance MECs in what has been a difficult but indeed hopeful time as well. My sincere appreciation to the following for their invaluable and constructive contributions: Mr. Taba Mufamadi, Mr. Sogoni, Mr. De Beer, Mr. Chane, who chair the Standing Committees of Finance and Appropriations and the Select Committee on Finance. The chairperson of SCOPA, Mr. Gordhan, Parliament itself, honourable members, for the crucial role it plays in processing and overseeing legislation, and we would like to call upon all parties to support government in the implementation of the NDP. Governor of the Reserve Bank, Ms. Marcus, and her team for a very supportive monetary policy. The Auditor General, Mr. Nombembe, who retires shortly, and I would also like to welcome his successor, Mr. Makwetu, and wish him and his staff well for their future work. To the Acting Commissioner of SARS, Mr. Pillay, and the staff of the South African Revenue Service for their creative and valiant efforts to collect revenue and taxes from all of you as well. Deputy Minister Nene, for his invaluable support and sharing of duties over the year. To Director General Mr. Fuzile of the Treasury, who provided erudite and prudent leadership, and the vast and dedicated and patriotic Treasury team, which has consistently done what is in the best interest of all South Africans. I also want to add my appreciation to the Directors General of all departments and heads of all government entities without whose cooperation the work that we do will not be possible. Honourable Speaker, we are living through, as we know, turbulent global economic circumstances. Taking the National Development Plan as a point of departure, Cabinet has agreed to a budget framework which protects our fiscal position and supports policies and programs that support inclusive and sustainable growth. This is a framework that acknowledges that there is hard work ahead and recognizes that a faster-growing economy is in everyone's interests. We will all gain when more people have work. We will all gain when more of our firms can compete in international markets and gain market share. We all gain when rising incomes contribute to greater capacity for public service delivery. We all gain when our divisions and inequality fade into history and we celebrate a shared and more prosperous future. As we head towards 2 full decades of freedom, let us reaffirm our commitment to the ideals that our leaders have stood for. And in the words of former President Nelson Mandela, overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be that great generation. Let your greatness blossom, end of quote. Honorable Speaker, I hereby submit the medium-term budget policy statement 2013, and I table, amongst the stack of documents, the adjusted estimates of national expenditure, the Adjustments Appropriation Bill 2013, the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill 2013 for consideration by Parliament. I thank you.